In the quiet mountain convent of Santa Rosa, Mexico, a group of cartel soldiers made their deadliest mistake. They kidnapped a nun. The ruthless Sangre Negra cartel stormed the chapel, laughing as they dragged the elderly sisters from their prayers. They expected tears begging an easy ransom. What they didn't expect, the click of a sniper rifle from the bell tower, because these weren't just any nuns. Sister Maria, the frail, 82-year-old Mother Superior, was once the CIA's most feared assassin, codenamed La Mania. And her sisters? Retired spies from Mossad, KGB, and MI6, hiding in plain sight. Now, as the cartel thugs trash the chapel, Maria whispers a prayer and locks the iron gates behind them. Trapped inside with God's deadliest servants, the cartel will learn the true meaning of divine punishment. "You picked the wrong house of God," Maria says, rolling up her sleeves to reveal a tattooed CIA service number. Don't miss the explosive showdown, where scripture meets sniper rifles and vengeance wears a habit. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and hit subscribe for more stories where the underdog strikes back. The sun had barely risen over the Sierra Madre Mountains when the silence of Convento de Santa Rosa was shattered by the roar of diesel engines and the crunch of tires on gravel. A convoy of black SUVs, their windows tinted and bristling with gun barrels, tore through the convent's crumbling outer wall, sending dust and debris flying into the crisp morning air. Inside the chapel, the sisters barely had time to look up from their prayers before the doors burst open, revealing a dozen armed men in tactical gear, their faces obscured by balaclavas. The leader, a hulking figure with a jagged scar running from his temple to his jaw, stepped forward, his boots echoing on the ancient stone floor. "Buenos dias, Hermanos," he sneered, his voice dripping with mock reverence as he ripped a crucifix from the wall and tossed it to the ground. "You're coming with us. The bishop wants his favorite lambs back for a price." The younger nuns gasped, clutching their rosaries, but at the front of the chapel, Mother Superior Maria, her spine still straight at 82, her hands folded calmly in her lap, merely watched, her sharp blue eyes tracking every movement. The cartel thugs laughed as they overturned pews, smashed stained glass windows, and dragged a terrified novice, Sister Lucia, toward the door by her hair. Lucia's screams filled the chapel, but Maria didn't flinch. Instead, as the scarred leader turned to leave, his men herding the sisters at gunpoint, she leaned toward Sister Gabriela, the convent's stoic medic, and whispered 3 words that would change everything: "Lock the gates." Outside, the cartel's laughter died abruptly as the convent's massive iron gates, rusted but still formidable, swung shut with a thunderous clang, the sound reverberating through the courtyard like a death knell. The scarred leader whirled around, his pistol raised, but Maria was already on her feet, her habit billowing as she strode toward him with the quiet authority of a woman who had faced far worse than armed thugs. "You misunderstand, Io," she said, her voice soft but edged with steel. "You're not taking us anywhere." For the first time, uncertainty flickered in the cartel leader's eyes as he took in the sudden stillness of the other nuns, the way their fear had vanished, replaced by something far more dangerous. Behind him, the gate's ancient locking mechanism, hidden for centuries, clicked into place with finality. The convent was now a fortress, and cartel? They weren't the hunters anymore. They were the prey. The moment the iron gates slammed shut with an echoing finality, the atmosphere inside the convent shifted from terror to something far more dangerous: controlled chaos. The cartel leader, El Carnicero, whirled around, his face contorted with rage as he raised his pistol toward Mother Superior Maria. But before he could pull the trigger, Sister Gabriela, her hand steady despite the adrenaline, slipped a needle-thin blade from her rosary beads and pressed it against the carotid artery of the nearest cartel thug. "I wouldn't," she murmured, her voice as calm as if she were discussing the morning's scripture. The message was clear: blood would spill, but wouldn't be theirs. The cartel men hesitated, their bravado faltering as they took in the sudden transformation of the women around them, the way the nuns' postures had straightened, their eyes sharpening with a focus that spoke of training, not prayer. Maria didn't flinch as El Carnicero's gun trembled in his grip. Instead, she reached slowly beneath the altar and withdrew a weathered Bible, its leather cover cracked with age. The cartel leader scoffed, expecting a plea for divine intervention, but what Maria pulled from between the pages wasn't a prayer card. It was a yellowed CIA dossier stamped with a classification so high it had been redacted even before most of these men were born. The photograph paper clipped to the front showed a younger Maria, her hair cropped short, her eyes cold as she stood beside a body in a Nicaraguan alleyway, the caption beneath reading simply, La Maña. Asset status, terminated, cover maintained. El Carnicero's sneer faded as Maria met his gaze. You came for hostages, she said, her voice low. But this convent, it's a tomb, and you just locked yourselves inside with us. Behind her, the sobbing novice, Sister Lucia, suddenly went still, then wiped her tears away with the back of her hand and smiled. The cartel thug holding her barely had time to register the change before Lucia twisted in his grip, driving her elbow into his throat with practiced precision. As he crumpled, gasping, she yanked a sleek smartphone from her habit and tapped a sequence that made the convent's lights flicker ominously. Firewalls up, Lucia announced, her voice now devoid of its earlier tremble. No signals in or out. They're cut off. The remaining nuns moved with sudden purpose, herding the cartel men toward the chapel's center with a coordination that spoke of rehearsed maneuvers. Maria stepped forward, the dossier still in her hand, and the scarred leader finally understood. These weren't just nuns. They were ghosts, and ghosts didn't need mercy. The convent's ancient stone walls seemed to hum with tension as the nuns moved with eerie precision, their habits whispering against the cold floor like ghosts of their former selves. Sister Lucia, her fingers flying across the screen of her modified smartphone, its casing disguised as a wooden rosary, let out a soft chuckle as the last of the cartel's radios emitted a dying whine before falling silent. Jammers activated, she murmured, slipping the device back into her sleeve, just as one of the thugs reached for his walkie-talkie, his face twisting in confusion when only static answered. Across the chapel, Sister Gabriella moved like a shadow among the cartel men, her hands steady as she poured water from a silver pitcher into tin cups, her lips moving in silent prayer, though the words were less scripture and more chemical formula as the colorless, odorless compound she distilled from the convent's medicinal herbs swirled into each serving. The cartel leader, Rey Muerte, accepted his cup with a sneer, his gold-capped teeth glinting in the candlelight as he raised it in a mocking toast to the nuns. To your health, Hermanus, he jeered, gulping the water down before wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, his men following suit with rough laughter. For a moment, the chapel held its breath, then the first cartel soldier clutched his stomach, his face draining of color as his knees buckled. Another followed, then another, their weapons clattering to the ground as their muscles betrayed them, their limbs heavy as stone. Ray's laughter died in his throat as he staggered, his hands braced against the altar, his veins standing out like dark ropes beneath his skin. What did you? He slurred, his vision swimming as Sister Gabriella stepped forward, her serene smile never wavering. A simple tincture of belladonna and valerian root, she explained, adjusting her wimple with the calm of a woman who had once neutralized an entire Mossad target list with nothing but a dinner party's wine selection. Non-lethal, of course. We are still women of God. The remaining cartel men, those who hadn't drunk the water, reached for their weapons, but found themselves staring down the barrels of antique pistols that had been concealed beneath the nuns' habits, their polished metal gleaming against the rough fabric. Sister Maria stepped forward, her CIA dossier still clutched in one hand, her other holding a sleek, modern handgun that looked starkly out of place against her aged fingers. You came here thinking you were predators, she said, her voice carrying the weight of decades of classified operations. But this convent has survived wars, revolutions, and men far more dangerous than you. Outside, the first streaks of dawn painted the stained glass windows in hues of blood and gold, casting long shadows that seemed to twist into the shapes of weapons, of watchful eyes, of sins waiting to be confessed. Rey Muerte, his body paralyzed but his mind horrifyingly clear, watched as the nuns moved among his fallen men, binding their wrists with their own rosary beads, their movements efficient and devoid of malice. It was then he realized the true horror of their situation. They hadn't stormed a convent. They'd stumbled into a spider's web, and the spiders were just beginning to stir. The chapel air hung thick with the scent of incense and the metallic tang of fear as the paralyzed cartel members lay strewn across the stone floor like broken marionettes, their labored breathing the only sign they still clung to consciousness. Sister Maria stood before the terrified young novices, girls who had entered the convent seeking peace, not war, their wide eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight as they pressed together in the pews like startled birds. Children, Maria began, her voice softening for the first time since the raid began, though her spine remained rod straight, her hands steady where they clasped before her. there is something you must know. We were warriors before we were brides of Christ." The words seemed to ripple through the chapel, settling into the ancient stones as the youngest novice, Sister Anna, stifled a sob with her sleeve. Maria reached out, calloused fingers tilting the girl's chin up with unexpected gentleness. "This life we have built here, the prayers, the gardens, the silence, it was not our first calling, but it is our truest one." Beyond them, Rey Muerte strained against his paralysis, his dark eyes burning with hate as he watched, helpless, while Maria turned to the stained glass depiction of the Archangel Michael above the altar, her gaze distant. Nicaragua, 1979. The year fell like a stone into still water, and suddenly the chapel dissolved into memory. The humid choke of Managua's backstreets, the staccato rhythm of gunfire in the distance, the coppery stench of blood as a younger Maria, her hair cropped short beneath a sniper's hood, pressed herself against a crumbling brick wall. The dictator's motorcade rounded the corner, right on schedule, and Maria exhaled, her finger curling around the trigger of her rifle. The shot rang out, a single, perfect strike through the open car window, and the dictator slumped forward, his forehead kissing the dashboard as chaos erupted below. Maria didn't wait to see the aftermath. She was already moving, slipping through the panicked crowd like smoke, her extraction point 3 blocks east. But as she ducked into the shadowed alcove of a bombed-out church, she found not her CIA handler, but a group of nuns huddled around a dying sister, their prayers rising in desperate whispers. The wounded woman's eyes locked onto Maria's, seeing past the blood smeared on her face, the rifle strapped to her back, and grasped her wrist with surprising strength. "You carry death," the nun gasped, her fingers leaving scarlet prints on Maria's skin, "but your soul cries for mercy. Stay." The memory fractured as a choked gasp echoed through the present-day chapel. Rey Muerte, his fingers twitching against the stone floor, had managed to roll onto his side, his jacket falling open to reveal the edge of a photograph tucked in his breast pocket. Maria went very still. She knew that face. The dictator from Nicaragua, his features frozen in a grainy surveillance still. The same man whose death had forced her into hiding, whose downfall had birthed 1,000 cartels in the power vacuum. Rey's lips peeled back in a grotesque smile as he followed her gaze, his voice a slurred rasp. "You recognize my father." The words landed like a grenade in the chapel's silence. Before Maria could respond, Sister Lucia lunged forward, snatching the photograph from Rey's pocket, only for a small, laminated card to flutter free from behind it. Time seemed to stop as it spun to the floor, landing face up beside Rey's paralyzed hand. The faded CIA identification badge gleamed dully in the candlelight, Maria's younger face staring blankly up at the vaulted ceiling, her code name, La Mania, clearly visible above the seal of the United States government. Rey's laugh was a wet, broken thing. "The Americans sent a nun to kill my father, and now God sends me to kill you." Outside, the first shouts of the cartel's reinforcements echoed through the courtyard, their boots pounding against the convent's ancient gates. The moment Rey Muerte's fingers twitched toward the incriminating CIA badge, Maria moved with the lethal grace of a woman who had spent decades turning hesitation into a liability. Her foot came down hard on the laminated card, pinning it to the stone floor as her other hand yanked a silver crucifix from around her neck, snapping the chain with a sharp twist. The young novices gasped as she pried open the cross's hollow base, revealing not a relic, but a miniature satellite phone, its screen blinking to life with an eerie blue glow. "Bishop Alvarez," Maria barked into the device, her voice stripped of its usual measured calm, the syllables sharp as gunfire. "Activate Ordo Sancti." A pause, then a familiar voice crackled through the speaker, older now, wearier, but still laced with the same authority that had once greenlit Black Ops in 7 countries. "Maria? Christ alive, it's been 23 years. The cartel has Santa Rosa," she interrupted, her eyes never leaving Rey's venomous stare. "They know who I am. They know what I am." Another beat of silence, then the bishop's sigh, heavy with the weight of old sins. "I'll wake the sisters." The line went dead just as the first thunderous crash shook the convent's main gates, the wood splintering under the assault of crowbars and rifle butts from the newly arrived cartel reinforcements. Sister Lucia was already at the window, her tech-savvy fingers flying across a tablet she'd produced from some hidden pocket of her habit. 30 men, maybe more," she reported, her voice clipped. "They've got a battering ram." Across the chapel, Sister Gabriella pressed a damp cloth to the forehead of a trembling novice, her Mossad-honed instincts assessing exits, weapons, casualties with clinical precision. "We can't hold them off forever," she murmured, more statement than question. Maria's lips thinned. "We don't have to." Somewhere in the frost-kissed vineyards of Burgundy, a nun named Sister Claire-Marie set down her pruning shears, her arthritic fingers pausing mid-motion as the antique bell in the abbey's tower began to ring. Not the measured toll of vespers, but the staccato rhythm of a code unused since the Cold War. In a dim Moscow apartment, a woman the neighbors knew only as Babushka Elena froze over her samovar, the teaspoon slipping from her fingers as her landline phone chirped twice, then went silent, a sound she hadn't heard since 1989. And outside El Paso, a wheelchair-bound nun named Sister Josephine abruptly stopped her morning gardening, her gnarled hands digging into the earth until they closed around a rusted metal box buried beneath the rosemary bushes. Within minutes, 3 unmarked helicopters lifted off from a private airfield outside Lyon. A retired MiG-29 roared to life in a forgotten hangar outside St. Petersburg, and a convoy of black SUVs sped toward the Mexican border, their drivers armed with Vatican diplomatic passports and hollow-point bullets. Back in Santa Rosa, the chapel's stained glass trembled as the cartel's battering rams struck the gates again, the iron hinges screaming in protest. Maria pressed the satellite phone to her chest, her whisper lost in the chaos. "Hold the line, sisters. The cavalry is coming." The world outside the convent erupted in a cacophony of diesel engines and shouted orders as the cartel's reinforcements fanned out across the courtyard, their shadows stretching long and grotesque in the pre-dawn light. A pickup truck skidded to a halt just beyond the shattered gates, its bed loaded with a rusted .50 caliber machine gun scavenged from some forgotten military surplus, the men struggling to heave the massive weapon onto its tripod mount as their commander bellowed curses into the morning air. Inside the chapel, the vibrations of their preparations thrummed through the stone floors, rattling the votive candles in their red glass holders as Sister Rosa, her thick fingers hovering over the pipe organ's yellowed keys, let out a derisive snort. "Heavy artillery," she muttered in her still thick Russian accent, her lips curling around the words like they were a particularly stupid joke. "These boys think they are soldiers." Her hands came down on the keys with sudden, startling force, the opening chords of Ave Maria shaking dust from rafters, but beneath the hymn's familiar melody, the pipes pulsed with something else entirely, a staccato rhythm of long and short notes that spelled out KADB 3-1-9 in Morse code, the ancient KGB distress signal she hadn't used since the Berlin Wall fell. Across the chapel, Sister Lucia's tablet chimed softly as it decoded the message, her eyebrows lifting as she read the translation aloud. "Burn the midnight oil? What the hell does that?" Maria cut her off with a sharp gesture, her eyes locked on the stained glass window where the first pink streaks of dawn were beginning to glow. "It means the cavalry's coming. And Rosa just told them we need fire support." Outside, the cartel's machine gun finally roared to life, the deafening staccato of gunfire chewing into the convent's outer walls, only for the bullets to ping harmlessly off stone that had been secretly reinforced with Soviet-era steel, plating in 1987, when the Vatican had quietly repurposed Santa Rosa as a safe house for displaced intelligence assets. The gunners' confused shout was cut short by a sound none of them expected: the wail of police sirens. 3 squad cars skidded into the courtyard, their lights painting the carnage in pulsing red and blue as Chief Mendoza, his uniform crisp, his mustache perfectly trimmed, stepped out, his hands raised in a placating gesture toward the cartel gunmen. "Easy, amigos," he called, his voice smooth as aged tequila. "Let's not make this uglier than it has to be." For one breathless moment, the shooting stopped, the cartel men glancing uncertainly between their leader and the police. Inside the chapel, Sister Gabriella's shoulders slumped in relief, until she caught the way Mendoza's right hand lingered near his holster, the subtle nod he gave to the cartel's second-in-command. Maria saw it too, her stomach dropping as the pieces clicked together. The too convenient timing, the lack of backup, the way the chief's eyes kept darting to the chapel's roof, where the convent's real secrets were hidden. "He's not here to save us," she breathed, just as Mendoza's pistol cleared its holster and fired a single shot into the air. Not a warning, but a signal. On cue, the police cars popped their trunks, revealing crates of grenades and assault rifles that the cartel men descended upon like vultures. The chapel's pipe organ fell silent as Rosa's hands stilled, her sharp eyes meeting Maria's across the pews. No words were needed. They'd both seen this play before in Kabul, in Beirut, in places where the lines between law and lawlessness blurred into nothing. The young novices huddled together, their prayers turning to whimpers as the first grenade thudded against the chapel's doors, the explosion shaking loose a shower of plaster from the ceiling. Maria grabbed Lucia's arm, her voice cutting through the chaos. The bell tower. Now. As they sprinted up the winding staircase, the cartel's renewed gunfire peppering the walls behind them, the distant drone of approaching aircraft began to hum beneath the cacophony, a sound that might have been hope if Maria didn't know better. Hope was for people who hadn't seen what happened when angels went to war. The bell tower stairs trembled underfoot as Maria and Lucia raced upward, the scent of gunpowder and burning wood thick in the air, while below them the chapel doors groaned under another grenade blast, the ancient hinges screaming in protest. Sister Gabriella had herded the remaining nuns into the sacristy, their voices rising in frantic prayer, all except one. Sister Anna, the youngest of the novices, stood frozen near the confessional booth, her fingers clutching a rosary that shook violently in her hands, her wide eyes darting between the carnage outside and the small silver phone hidden in her sleeve. She didn't notice Sister Rosa watching her from a shadowed alcove near the altar, the older nun's sharp gaze tracking the way Anna's thumb swiped across the phone's screen with practiced ease, the way her breath hitched when a message flashed back. 10 minutes. Be ready. Rosa moved like a specter, her thick hand closing around Anna's wrist before the girl could react, yanking the phone into the open as the chapel doors finally gave way with a thunderous crash, cartel men pouring into the nave like a black tide. "You little fool," Rosa hissed, her Russian accent roughened with fury, as she shook the phone in Anna's pale face, the screen still glowing with damning proof. The other nuns turned as one, their expressions shifting from fear to betrayal in an instant, their murmured prayers dying on their lips. Anna's knees buckled, her desperate whisper barely audible over the gunfire. "They have my brother. They said they'd kill him." Maria materialized from the smoke then, descending the bell tower steps with Lucia close behind, her habit streaked with soot, her eyes burning with something colder than anger. She didn't speak at first, only took the phone from Rosa's grip, her thumb scrolling through the messages with methodical precision. The evidence was undeniable. Anna had given the cartel the convent's layout, the sisters' routines, the perfect time to strike. Outside, the cartel leader's voice rang out, taunting, "Send out the girl and we'll spare the rest." Maria's head snapped up at that, her gaze locking onto Anna's tear-streaked face. "You were never one of us, were you?" she asked, her voice dangerously soft. Anna shook violently, her words tumbling out in a frantic whisper. "I never wanted to hurt anyone, but my brother, he's all I have left. They took him months ago, said they'd only give him back if I..." Her voice broke, her small frame folding in on itself as the weight of her betrayal crashed down. Maria studied her for a long moment, the sounds of the encroaching cartel fading into the background, then reached out, not to strike, but to tilt Anna's chin up, forcing the girl to meet her eyes. "Redemption or ruin, child. Choose now." The words hung in the air like a blade, the chapel holding its breath. Anna's lips trembled, her fingers twisting in her habit as the cartel's footsteps grew louder, their laughter filtering through the shattered stained glass. Then, with a shuddering inhale, she reached into the folds of her robe and pulled out a small, jagged shard of metal, a broken piece of the convent's shattered crucifix, sharpened to a point. "I choose redemption," she whispered, and before anyone could react, she was moving, darting past Maria and toward the broken chapel doors, her bare feet silent on the stone floor. The cartel men barely had time to register the small figure rushing them before Anna was among them, her makeshift blade flashing in the dim light as she drove it into the thigh of the nearest gunman, his scream of surprise more than pain echoing through the nave. Chaos erupted, shouts, gunfire, the thud of bodies hitting the ground, and in the confusion, Anna vanished into the smoke, her voice rising above the din in a desperate cry. "Javier! I'm here! Javier!" Maria didn't hesitate. She raised her own weapon, her voice cutting through the madness like a knife. "Protect her," she ordered, and the nuns moved as one, their habits billowing as they surged forward, not in retreat, but in battle formation. Somewhere in the chaos, a cartel thug howled as Sister Gabriella's needle-thin scalpel found its mark, while Rosa hefted a brass candlestick like a club, her KGB training resurfacing with brutal efficiency. And through it all, Maria advanced, her eyes never leaving Anna's fleeing form as the girl disappeared into the courtyard, her brother's name still on her lips. The cartel had thought they'd broken the convent with betrayal. They were about to learn that faith, once tested, could be the most dangerous weapon of all. The chapel had become a battlefield, the once sacred air now thick with the acrid stench of gunpowder and the metallic tang of blood as the nuns moved with lethal precision, their habits swirling around them like the robes of avenging angels. Sister Maria barely had time to process Anna's desperate charge into the courtyard before she was barking orders, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade as she dropped to her knees beside the altar, her fingers finding the nearly invisible seam in the stone floor that marked the entrance to the convent's most closely guarded secret. With a grunt of effort, she pried up the heavy slab, revealing a cache of weapons that would have made any armory proud. Pistols nestled inside hollowed-out Bibles, garrotes woven into rosary beads, even a few grenades disguised as ornate censers. The younger nuns gasped, their eyes wide as Maria began distributing the arsenal with the practiced ease of a woman who had spent a lifetime preparing for this moment. "Sister Gabriella, take the east corridor. Hold them off as long as you can," she ordered, pressing a compact Glock into the ex-Mossad medic's hands. "Rosa, the bell tower. I need eyes on Anna." The Russian nun nodded once before snatching up a rifle that had been hidden inside a pipe organ's casing, her arthritic fingers moving with surprising speed as she loaded it with rounds that had been concealed inside candle wax. Meanwhile, Sister Lucia had retreated to the sacristy, her laptop stashed behind a painting of St. Michael, already humming to life as her fingers flew across the keyboard, her face illuminated by the glow of multiple screens. "I'm into their mainframe," she announced, her voice tight with concentration as lines of code scrolled past at dizzying speed. "Their entire financial network is built on the same server as their comms. Firewalls are garbage." Maria didn't hesitate. "Burn it down." Lucia's grin was all teeth as she typed the final command, the screen flashing red before displaying a single word: transfer complete. Somewhere in a Zurich bank, $20 million of cartel blood money vanished from encrypted accounts, reappearing seconds later in the coffers of orphanages and women's shelters across Mexico. The cartel's response was immediate. The gunfire stuttered to a halt as shouts of confusion erupted outside, followed by the panicked ringing of cell phones. Rey Muerte's voice rose above the din, raw with fury. "What did you do?" The answer came not from the nuns, but from the sudden roar of engines as 3 black SUVs tore through the convent's ruined gates, their headlights cutting through the smoke like the eyes of some primordial beast. Sister Maria's breath caught. Had the bishop's reinforcements arrived? But the hope died as quickly as it had come when the lead vehicle's window rolled down, revealing not a nun, but the cold, calculating face of Chief Mendoza, his police badge glinting in the firelight as he raised a megaphone to his lips. "Last chance, sisters," he called, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Come out now and we'll make it quick." Behind him, Ray emerged from the smoke, his face a mask of barely contained rage, as he dragged a gasoline canister from one of the trucks, its contents sloshing ominously. "You took my money," he spat, his voice trembling with barely contained fury. "Then I'll take your lives." The match in his hand flared to life with a hiss, the tiny flame dancing in the dawn light as he held it aloft, his eyes locked on Maria's. "Say your prayers, Puta." The match left Rey Muerte's fingers in a slow, almost graceful arc, tumbling end over end through the smoke-choked air as time seemed to stretch and warp around it, the tiny flame reflecting in Maria's widened pupils as she braced for the inevitable explosion. But the detonation that came wasn't from a gasoline at all, but from the lead SUV's windshield erupting in a spiderweb of cracks as a high-caliber round punched through it with surgical precision, the bullet continuing its path to strike. The match cleanly out of the air mere inches from its deadly destination. For one heartbeat, everything froze. Ray's face twisted in disbelief, the cartel men whipping their heads toward the distant ridge where the shot had originated, Chief Mendoza diving for cover. Then all hell broke loose as the sky itself seemed to split open with the thunder of rotor blades, 3 unmarked black helicopters descending like avenging angels through the dissipating smoke, their side doors yawning open to reveal figures in black tactical gear rappelling down on zip lines. But these weren't ordinary commandos. The way they moved betrayed their age, their silver hair visible beneath helmet straps, their hands steady despite the years that had passed since they'd last seen active combat. Sister Maria's breath caught as the first figure landed gracefully on the convent's roof, rolling to absorb the impact before rising with a familiar fluidity, her sniper rifle already unslung and seeking targets. Sister Claire Marie, her French accent still thick despite decades in hiding, called down with a grin that was all teeth. "Did you miss me, ma sir?" Before Maria could respond, another shot rang out from a ridge, this time taking a cartel lookout cleanly off his perch atop the wall, the man crumpling without so much as a scream. Through her scope, Sister Ingrid, formerly of East Germany's infamous Stasi Sniper Corps, allowed herself a small, satisfied smirk as she chambered another round, her aged fingers moving with the same lethal precision they'd had in 1989. The cartel's confusion turned to panic as their men began dropping like flies, picked off by shots that seemed to come from nowhere, their return fire wild and uncoordinated. Just when it seemed the tide might turn completely, the throaty roar of approaching engines announced the arrival of yet more vehicles, this time official Mexican Army Humvees with Special Forces markings, their turret-mounted guns swiveling to track the remaining cartel members. But it was the man who stepped from the lead helicopter who made Maria's pulse stutter, Bishop Alvarez, her old CIA handler, his clerical collar stark against his black tactical vest, his face lined with age, but his eyes as sharp as ever. He met Maria's gaze across the battlefield, his nod conveying more than words ever could. "I told you I'd come," before turning to bark orders at the soldiers fanning out around him. Rey Muerte, realizing his position was now hopeless, made one last desperate play. He lunged for Ana, who was still crouched near the cartel truck where she'd been searching for her brother, his knife flashing in the morning light as he dragged her against his chest, the blade pressing to her throat. "Back off," he screamed, spittle flying from his lips, "or the girl dies now." The battlefield fell silent, all eyes turning to the standoff, but Maria didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped forward, her hands empty, her voice calm as she addressed not Rey, but Ana herself. "Remember your choice, child." Ana's eyes, wide with fear just moments before, suddenly hardened with resolve. Her elbow drove backward into Rey's ribs with surprising force, her head snapping back to connect with his nose in a crunch of cartilage, just enough distraction for the shot to ring out, the bullet taking Rey square between the eyes from Sister Ingrid's perch on the ridge. As his body collapsed, the remaining cartel members dropped their weapons in surrender, the sudden silence broken only by the whimpers of the wounded and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Maria allowed herself one deep, shuddering breath before turning to face the bishop, the question in her eyes answered before she could voice it. He held up a satellite phone, the screen displaying a single word: extraction. The convent had been saved, but the war? The war was just beginning. The acrid scent of gunpowder and spilled gasoline still hung heavy in the air as Sister Maria knelt beside Rey Muerte's twitching body, her fingers pressing against his throat in a futile search for a pulse that wasn't there, the warmth already leaching from his skin as his lifeless eyes stared blankly at the smoke-choked sky. Around her, the convent courtyard had descended into organized chaos, Mexican special forces rounding up the surviving cartel members, Sister Gabriela triaging the wounded with battlefield efficiency, and Bishop Alvarez barking orders into a satellite phone while simultaneously directing a team of soldiers to secure the perimeter. But Maria's attention was drawn to the small, crumpled form of Sister Ana, who had crawled to the bullet-riddled cartel truck where her brother was supposedly being held captive, her desperate fingers prying open the dented rear doors with a strength born of pure desperation. The sight that greeted her was not the frightened teenager she remembered, but a hardened man in his late 20s with cold, calculating eyes and a pistol already leveled at Maria's back. Ana's choked sob of Javier was met with a humorless smile as the man stepped from the truck, his weapon never wavering, his voice dripping with condescension as he corrected her. "My name is Mateo. Javier died in a ditch 3 years ago when he tried to run from the cartel." The revelation hit Ana like a physical blow, her knees giving way as the enormity of her betrayal crashed over her. She had endangered the sisters, compromised the convent, all for a lie. Before she could fully process the horror, Mateo's finger tightened on the trigger, his aim shifting from Maria to the bishop. But Maria was already moving, her body a blur of black fabric as she snatched up a broken crucifix from the rubble, its jagged base gleaming wickedly in the morning light. The gunshot was deafening in the confined space, but Maria had anticipated the move, her years of close-quarters combat training taking over as she twisted sideways, the bullet grazing her habit as she brought the crucifix down in a vicious arc, the sharpened end embedding itself in Mateo's wrist with a sickening crunch. His scream of pain was cut short as Maria followed through with a knee to his solar plexus, sending him crashing to the ground, the gun skittering across the blood-slicked cobblestones. The entire confrontation had taken less than 5 seconds, but it was enough to draw the attention of everyone in the courtyard. Bishop Alvarez's face paled as he recognized the tactical significance of Mateo's presence, his voice sharp as he ordered the Mexican soldiers to secure the perimeter. "This wasn't just about revenge," he muttered to Maria, his eyes scanning the horizon for additional threats. "They sent a professional to extract something." Maria's mind raced as she pieced together the implications: Ray's obsession with her past, the cartel's sudden interest in a remote convent, Mateo's infiltration. It all pointed to something far more valuable than simple retaliation. Her thoughts were interrupted by Sister Lucia's triumphant shout from the chapel steps. The young tech nun had rigged up a live stream using the cartel's abandoned equipment, Ray's lifeless face now framed in the camera's viewfinder as she narrated in flawless Spanish. "The world needs to see this." With a few keystrokes, she activated every screen in a 10-mile radius, cell phones, billboards, even the ancient television in the village cantina, all broadcasting Ray's final moments as Sister Gabriela forced a truth serum between his slack lips, the drugs working posthumously to relax his vocal cords enough for Lucia's voice modulation software to reconstruct his confession from residual brain activity. It was macabre, unethical, and utterly effective. Ray's ghostly voice filled the airwaves, detailing cartel routes, payoffs, and even the name of the corrupt governor on their payroll, his words sending shockwaves through the nation that would topple empires before sunset. But the victory felt hollow as Maria turned back to Ana, the young novice now cradling her brothers, no Mateo's, bloodied head in her lap, her tears cutting clean streaks through the grime on her face. The assassin was fading fast, the crucifix wound having nicked an artery, but his lips still curled in defiance as he spat his last words at Maria. "You think this is over? They'll burn this place to the ground for what's buried here." His body went slack before Maria could demand answers, leaving only the echo of his threat hanging in the air. Bishop Alvarez's hand on her shoulder was heavy with unspoken implications. This was bigger than any of them had anticipated. Somewhere beneath the convent's ancient stones lay a secret worth killing for, and Maria knew with cold certainty that Ray and his cartel had merely been the first wave. The real battle was yet to come, and it would test the limits of her faith, her skills, and the bonds of the sisterhood that had become her family. As the first news helicopters appeared on the horizon, drawn by the viral spectacle of a dead cartel boss's confession, Maria made the sign of the cross over Mateo's body, not in forgiveness, but in grim acknowledgement of the war she had just re-entered. The convent's bells, miraculously undamaged, began to toll on their own, their deep, resonant peals vibrating through the courtyard like a warning, or perhaps a challenge. The chapel had become a battleground of shadows and muzzle flashes, the once sacred space now echoing with the staccato rhythm of gunfire and the guttural shouts of cartel soldiers as they poured through every shattered window and broken doorway, their weapons spraying bullets that ricocheted off the stone pillars and tore through the wooden pews, sending splinters flying like shrapnel. Sister Maria moved with the precision of a woman who had spent a lifetime dancing with death, her habit whipping around her as she dodged behind the massive altar, the cold metal of a pistol pressed against her palm as she returned fire, each shot measured and deliberate, her breathing steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Across the nave, Sister Gabriela was a blur of motion, her medical satchel now repurposed as a makeshift arsenal, her hands moving with the same lethal grace that had once made her one of Mossad's most feared operatives. She yanked the pins from what appeared to be simple sensors used for incense, but the moment they left her fingers and rolled toward the cartel positions, they erupted in billowing clouds of acrid smoke that burned the eyes and throat, sending men stumbling blindly into each. Others line of fire, their curses turning to choked gasps as the chemical concoction, a little something she perfected during the Lebanon crisis, took effect. The chaos was orchestrated madness, the nuns moving like pieces on a chessboard, each with a role honed by years of covert training. Sister Lucia had barricaded herself in confessional booth, her laptop open as she jammed enemy communications and redirected police frequencies, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she muttered obscenities under her breath. Sister Rosa, the ex-KGB operative, had taken up position in the choir loft, her sniper rifle picking off cartel reinforcements as they tried to flank the chapel. Each shot a perfect echo of her glory days in East Berlin. But for all their skill, the numbers were against them. The cartel seemed endless, a hydra sprouting new heads with every fallen comrade, their desperation making them reckless, their bullets chewing through the chapel's ancient walls like termites through wood. Then came the sound that froze the blood in Maria's veins, a deep, groaning creak from above, followed by the sickening crack of splintering stone. She barely had time to shout a warning before the bell tower gave way, its foundations compromised by grenade blasts, the massive structure collapsing in a thunderous roar of crumbling masonry and twisting metal, the bell itself tearing free from its moorings and crashing through the chapel roof in a shower of broken tiles and dust. Maria's world became a blur of motion and noise as she dove for cover, her body slamming into the unforgiving stone floor as debris rained down around her. When the dust settled, she found herself pinned beneath a fallen beam, her legs screaming in protest as she tried to move, her vision swimming in and out of focus. Through the haze, she saw Rey Muerte staggering to his feet amidst the wreckage, his face a mask of blood and soot, his eyes locking onto hers with a predator's intensity. The collapse had cut them off from the others, the rubble creating a makeshift arena where only one of them would walk away. Rey wiped the blood from his mouth with the back of his hand, his lips peeling back in a grin that showed too many teeth as he reached for the machete strapped to his thigh, the blade glinting wickedly in the firelight. "No more tricks, Puta," he spat, advancing toward her with the slow, deliberate steps of a man savoring his revenge. Maria's fingers scrabbled against the debris, searching for anything she could use as a weapon. Her pistol was gone, lost in the collapse, and the beam across her legs was too heavy to lift. But as Rey raised the machete high, his muscles coiling for the killing strike, Maria's hand closed around a jagged piece of stained glass, its edges sharp enough to draw blood even as she gripped it. She wouldn't die on her knees. The world had narrowed to the circle of flickering firelight where Maria and Rey faced each other amidst the smoldering ruins of a chapel, the air thick with the scent of burning wood and spilled blood, the distant shouts of the surviving nuns and cartel members muffled by the towering piles of rubble that separated them from the deadly dance unfolding in what remained of the nave. Rey's machete gleamed like a serpent's tongue in the unstable light, his muscles coiled with the promise of violence as he circled Maria, his boots crunching over broken glass and splintered wood, his breath coming in ragged gasps that spoke of broken ribs and fading stamina, but his eyes burned with undiminished hatred. Maria, still pinned from the waist down beneath the heavy beam, gripped the shard of stained glass so tightly her palm bled, the pain a grounding force against the dizziness threatening to pull her under. She knew she had one chance, and it would require perfect timing, perfect precision, and a healthy dose of divine intervention. Rey seemed to sense her vulnerability, his grin widening as he feinted left, then right, testing her reactions, savoring her helplessness before he finally spoke, his voice dripping with mock piety. "Prayers won't save you now, Hermana. Got abandoned this place long ago." Maria's response was calm, measured, as she subtly adjusted her grip on the glass and let her eyes flicker upward for the briefest instant. "But he will forgive me." The words hung in the air between them, a gauntlet thrown, a challenge issued, and in that split second of distraction, Maria struck, not at Rey, but at the frayed rope holding the massive iron chandelier above them, her shard of glass flying from her fingers with unerring accuracy to slice through the last intact fibers. The chandelier plummeted like the fist of an angry god, its rusted spikes aimed squarely at Rey's skull. He had just enough time to look up, his face contorting in shock, before the impact drove him to the ground with a wet crunch, the iron monstrosity pinning him beneath its weight, his machete skittering harmlessly across the floor. Maria didn't waste a moment, using the last of her strength to shove the beam off her legs, her muscles screaming in protest as she dragged herself toward Rey's twitching form, her fingers closing around the fallen machete just as the chapel's surviving doors burst open, revealing a squad of Mexican special forces with Bishop Alvarez at their head, their weapons trained on the scene before them. The bishop took in the destruction, the burning pews, the collapsed bell tower, the chandelier now serving as Rey's tombstone, before his gaze settled on Maria, her habit torn and bloodied, her face streaked with soot and sweat, but her eyes alight with grim triumph. "You couldn't have waited for backup?" he asked dryly, though the relief in his voice was unmistakable. Maria's response was a tired smirk as she let the machete clatter to the ground. "You're late." Outside, the remaining cartel members were being rounded up by the army, their hands bound with zip ties as Sister Gabriella directed medics to the wounded, her voice steady despite the blood staining her own sleeves. Sister Lucia had emerged from her tech nest in the confessional, her laptop miraculously intact as she continued to broadcast the cartel's crimes to the world, the footage of Ray's final moments already going viral. And in the shadow of the ruined bell tower, Sister Anna knelt beside the body of the man who had pretended to be her brother, her tears falling freely now, not for the stranger he had been, but for the brother she had truly lost. Maria limped to her side, placing a hand on the young novice's shoulder. No words were needed, the simple gesture speaking volumes. The battle was over, but the war for their souls was just beginning. As dawn broke over the smoldering remains of Santa Rosa, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, the convent's surviving bell, the one that had miraculously remained intact, told a single, solemn note, a requiem for the fallen, and a warning to those who would dare threaten God's most unlikely warriors again. The morning sun rose over the smoldering remains of Santa Rosa, casting long shadows across the courtyard where Mexican soldiers and surviving nuns worked side by side to clear the rubble, their movements weary but determined, the air thick with the scent of charred wood and the metallic tang of drying blood. In the days following the battle, the Vatican had issued a carefully worded statement, delivered by a red-faced cardinal on international television, declaring the nuns' survival a miracle of divine intervention, their improbable victory over the cartel attributed to the power of prayer, rather than the very real arsenal of weapons now being catalogued by bemused government officials. Bishop Alvarez had overseen the delicate operation of scrubbing all traces of intelligence involvement from official record, his connections ensuring that the cartel members who survived would face justice not in a courtroom, but in the reconstruction efforts. Shackled together in work crews under the watchful eyes of armed nuns, their sentences commuted to hard labor building a new school on the convent's grounds. A poetic punishment that Sister Gabriella had suggested with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The real work, however, was happening beneath the surface, literally. In the crypt below the ruined chapel, a team of specialists, discreetly vetted by the bishop, worked around the clock to excavate what Ray had died trying to reach. A Cold War-era vault containing files so explosive they had been buried rather than destroyed, their contents known only to a handful of now-dead operatives. Maria supervised the operation from a distance, her injuries still fresh, but her mind sharper than ever, the pieces of the puzzle slowly falling into place. Ray's obsession, the cartel's sudden interest in a remote convent, Mateo's infiltration. It all pointed to someone high up wanting those files erased. Meanwhile, Sister Anna moved through the convent like a ghost, her hands constantly busy, mending habits, scrubbing floors, tending the wounded, as if physical labor could absolve her of the guilt that clung to her like a second skin. When Maria finally cornered her in the herb garden, the young novice didn't flinch from the hard questions, her voice barely above a whisper, as she confessed, "I want to stay. Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because I need to earn this." She gestured to the torn habit she still wore, the fabric now mended but forever marked. Maria studied her for a long moment before nodding. Forgiveness would come in time, but trust was a currency that had to be repaid in deeds, not words. As the first cartel-laid bricks of a new schoolhouse began to rise from the ashes, the convent's surviving bell, rehung in a makeshift tower, rang out across the valley, its peals a declaration of resilience that echoed far beyond the mountains. The world might never know the truth about Santa Rosa's nuns, but in the quiet moments between rebuilding and remembrance, Maria would catch glimpses of the future taking shape. Sister Lucia teaching local children a code in the rebuilt library, Sister Rosa showing them how to garden, while discreetly pointing out which plants could heal or harm. And Anna, always Anna, watching the horizon with new wariness, her penance a living thing that would one day become purpose. The files from the crypt were safely en route to a secure location, their secrets temporarily contained, but Maria knew better than to think the battle was truly over. Somewhere out there, other players were moving pieces on a board she couldn't yet see, and when they came for Santa Rosa again, and they would, she and her sisters would be ready. Not just with weapons, but with something far more dangerous, the unshakable conviction that some things were worth fighting for, even if the world would never know their names. The skeletal frame of the new convent rose from the ashes of the old, its stone walls carefully reconstructed to the untrained eye, but fundamentally transformed for those who knew where to look. Hidden passages snaked behind the wainscoting, panic rooms disguised as prayer closets dotted the hallways, and the bell tower, now reinforced with steel plating, offered sight lines that would make any sniper weep with joy. Sister Maria moved through the construction site with the quiet authority of a woman who had overseen far more dangerous operations, her sharp eyes missing nothing as she inspected the progress. The masons and carpenters working under the watchful gaze of cartel laborers, their ankle monitors blinking red beneath their pant legs, their hands calloused from honest work for the first time in their lives. The school they had built stood proudly on the hill overlooking Santa Rosa Village, its halls already filled with the laughter of children who would grow up knowing nothing of the blood spilled to give them this chance. And Maria allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction as she watched Sister Lucia lead a coding class through the basics of cybersecurity. The young nun's habit swapped for a graphic tee that read, "Control plus Alt plus Defeat," in bold letters. The real transformation, however, was happening in the rebuilt chapel, where Maria now spent her mornings training the youngest novices in what she euphemistically called spiritual defense, a curriculum that included everything from disarming an attacker with a rosary to mixing untraceable poisons from the herb garden's most innocuous plants. The girls, wide-eyed and eager, absorbed the lessons with a fervor that would have alarmed any traditional abbess, but Maria knew the truth. Innocence was no longer protection in a world where cartels targeted the helpless. Their most promising student, a fiery 15-year-old named Esperanza, who had lost her family to the very men now building their school, could already field strip a pistol faster than some soldiers Maria had known, her small hands moving with a precision that spoke of vengeance waiting to be tempered by time and purpose. It was on one such morning, as Maria demonstrated how to use a communion wafer to conceal a microtransmitter, a trick she learned in Budapest in '76, that the quiet hum of reconstruction was shattered by the arrival of a black SUV with diplomatic plates, its tinted windows reflecting the chapel's stained glass as it rolled to a stop in the courtyard. The man who stepped out wore the crisp uniform of a U.S. military attaché, his posture rigid, his sunglasses hiding eyes that had seen too much, but Maria recognized the set of his jaw, the way his right hand twitched toward a hip holster that wasn't there. Agent Daniel Carter, her last surviving contact from Langley, had come calling. The courtyard fell silent as he approached, the nuns pausing in their work, the cartel laborers shrinking back instinctively. Even they sensed the danger in this one. Carter didn't bother with pleasantries, his voice low and urgent as he cut straight to the point. "We need you back, Maria. The files from the crypt, they're just the tip of the iceberg. There's a cell operating in Mexico City, planning something big, and you're the only one who can get close." He held out a slim dossier, the CIA seal glaring in the sunlight, but Maria didn't reach for it. Behind her, the chapel doors stood open, revealing the rebuilt altar where she had once hidden weapons in the name of God, the same altar where she now knelt each morning in honest prayer. The pause stretched, heavy with the weight of decades-old loyalties and newer, harder truths, before Maria finally spoke, her voice carrying across the courtyard to where her sisters stood watching. "I served my country for 20 years, Daniel. Buried friends. Did things that still haunt me." She reached up, fingers brushing the silver cross at her throat, the one that had once hidden a satellite phone. "But this isn't a cover anymore. These women aren't assets. This place isn't a safe house." Carter's face tightened, his professional mask slipping just enough to show the frustration beneath. "You can't just walk away from who you are," he hissed. Maria smiled, then a real smile, warm as the sun on the chapel stones. "I didn't walk away. I came home." She turned her back on him, on the dossier, on the life that had nearly destroyed her, and walked toward the chapel where her students waited. Not a retired spy, not a weapon to be wielded, but simply Sister Maria, teacher of strange lessons and keeper of stranger secrets. Carter stood frozen for a long moment before slamming the dossier onto a nearby work table and stalking back to his car, the engine roaring to life as he peeled away in a cloud of dust. Maria didn't watch him go. She was too busy showing Esperanza how to garrote a man with sacramental ribbon, the girls' laughter ringing through the chapel like the purest kind of prayer. 15 years had woven themselves into the stones of Santa Rosa like golden threads through tapestry, the scars of the past softened by time, but never fully erased. The bullet holes in the chapel walls had been artfully incorporated into new mosaics depicting the archangels. The schoolhouse stood proud and bustling with children who would never know the blood spilled to build it. And the once feared cartel laborers had long since served their sentences, some even returning as free men to tend the gardens they'd once been forced to construct. Sister Maria, her hair now the silver of moonlight on snow, moved through the convent's sun-dappled corridors with the measured grace of a woman who had outlived her enemies, her hands no longer quick with knives but still sharp with wisdom as she guided the newest generation of nuns, girls who had grown up hearing whispered legends of the angels of Santa Rosa, and now wore the habit with a quiet pride that bordered on reverence. The morning air was thick with the scent of orange blossoms and fresh bread as the sisters went about their routines. Sister Lucia, her tech-savvy fingers now teaching robotics to wide-eyed village children. Sister Gabriella, her Mossad-honed instincts now channeled into running the region's finest free clinic. And Sister Anna, no longer the trembling novice, but the convent's steely-eyed head of security, her past sins reforged into unshakable devotion to protecting their peace. The tranquility of the morning was shattered by the roar of unmuffled engines as a convoy of black trucks skidded to a halt outside the convent gates, their doors flying open to disgorge a new generation of cartel thugs, young, arrogant, and utterly ignorant of history. Their leader, a pockmarked brute with a serpent tattoo coiled around his neck, kicked open the chapel doors with a sneer, his men fanning out behind him as he leveled a pistol at the elderly nun kneeling at the altar. "You're coming with us, Abuelita," he jeered, grabbing her by the arm. The boss wants to meet the famous sisters who think they're untouchable. The nun, Sister Esperanza, now grown into the fiery woman Maria had always known she would become, didn't resist as he yanked her to her feet, her hands moving in a gesture that seemed like surrender until her fingers completed the sign of the cross in a very specific sequence. Thumb to forehead, down to sternum, left to right shoulder with a deliberate pause. The chapel's stained glass windows darkened instantly as hidden panels slid aside, the barrels of automated turrets emerging with a synchronized hum that froze the cartel men mid-step. Esperanza's smile was beatific as she plucked the pistol from the leader's suddenly limp fingers. "We've updated our security," she murmured just as the motion sensors locked on. The ensuing chaos lasted precisely 11 seconds, the exact time it took for the turret's non-lethal rounds to find their marks, dropping each cartel member with pinpoint accuracy, their bodies convulsing as the taser rounds deliver voltage strong enough to humble even the most arrogant of men. Maria arrived as the last thug hit the ground, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence as she surveyed the scene with an expression that hovered between exasperation and pride. "You couldn't have let them get to the courtyard," she chided, nudging one twitching body with her cane. "The tiles are easier to clean." Esperanza's laughter rang through the chapel as she handed Maria the confiscated pistol, its gaudy gold plating gleaming in the sunlight streaming through the now transparent windows. Outside, the village police, many of them former students of the convent school, were already arriving to haul the would-be kidnappers away, their expressions a mix of amusement and reverence as they nodded to the nuns. Maria watched them go, her fingers absently tracing the grooves of the silver cross around her neck, no longer a hidden tool, just a symbol of the life she'd chosen. The chapel bells began to toll the hour, their peals rolling across the valley like a promise, like a warning, like the heartbeat of something that would endure long after she was gone. In the courtyard, a new class of novices gathered around Sister Anna, their eager faces tilted up as she demonstrated how to disable a man with a well-placed prayer book. Maria allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. The world would always need monsters, but sometimes, just sometimes, the monsters chose to stand guard at the gates instead of breaking them down. She turned back to the altar, her final words lost to all but the saints watching from their mosaics. "The Lord forgives. We arrange consequences."